From the legendary Tunney and Dempsey fight that introduced the mandatory 8-count rule to the controversial open scoring rule that could change boxing in a major way, these are the boxing rules fans had no idea about. Until now. I'll kick this off with the long count fight between Gene Tunney and Jack Dempsey. I know I said that the fight was legendary, but it was also one of the most controversial bouts of its time. In fact, die-hard boxing fans still talk about it in Reddit threads to this day. But what was so special about it? Let me set the stage. Around 100,000 eager fans gathered in Chicago's Soldier Field to witness the bout on September 22, 1927. Things were electric, and for good reason. Tunney had won the championship title from Dempsey in the previous year, and this rematch was to settle a debt. Dempsey was angry, but more than that, he wanted to humiliate his opponent. The bell rang, and both fighters began trading blows, landing one heavy shot after another. Things went according to plan until the 7th round. That's when the match earned its title as one of the most memorable matches in boxing history. Now, Dempsey was known for his overwhelming power. His punches hit hard, and in the 7th round, he landed a massive right to Tunney's face that sent him crashing to the canvas. The referee started the 10 count immediately, like rules require, obviously, right? But instead of going to his corner, Dempsey stood over Tunney, waiting for him to get up. You see, back in the old days, the boxing world was a bit lawless. Boxers could start punching their opponents while they were trying to get up. And that was just one of the tactics they used to make sure their opponents stayed down. Since Dempsey refused to go to a neutral corner, the referee was forced to hold off on the 10 count. Dempsey hovered over Tunney for 4 seconds, which was just enough time for his opponent to shake off the punch. When the referee finally began the count, it was too late. And guess what? Tunney ended up winning their bout. People discuss to this day whether it was the long count that cost Dempsey the fight. And I think it was. Soon after the fight, there were 2 new rules for pro boxing. The first was the mandatory 8 count. This meant that when a fighter gets knocked down, the referee needs to count to 8 before deciding whether a fight should continue. Ever wonder why referees nowadays keep counting to 8 even if a fighter has gotten up and is fully alert? That's why. And the second change was the introduction of the neutral corner rule. When a fighter is knocked down, his opponent must go to a neutral corner before the referee can begin the count. It seems like an obvious rule, and it is. But back in 1927, it felt like a novelty. I'm glad they introduced these changes into the world of boxing because otherwise, we might have had more fights like Tunney and Dempsey. Oh, and this next rule also sounds like a very obvious thing in boxing, but trust me, the late 1800s were wild. Back then, there were no weight classes in boxing. Today, there are 17 weight classes ranging from minimum weight, or about 105 pounds, to heavyweight, in which the weight is unlimited. But the early days of boxing were the Wild West of combat sports. Boxers used to fight in fairs, carnivals, and other public events, and used tactics such as grappling, wrestling, and even their bare knuckles. No one cared about safety back then. It was purely a spectacle, and anyone of any size could compete with anyone else. It was insane. It wasn't until the early 1900s when the National Sporting Club of London introduced the more important sets of weight classes, such as heavyweight, cruiserweight, and even flyweight. But get this, in the 1960s, the WBC and WBA narrowed the weight divisions to allow for more champions per division. Throughout the years, more and more divisions were added, such as the strawweight or minimum weight in 1987, and even the more recent Bridger weight in 2020. But for all the rules and regulations we're so used to, we've got to thank British nobleman John Sholto Douglas, the 9th Marquess of Queensberry, for creating the foundational rules of the sport we all enjoy. Ever wondered why boxers are required to wear a mouthguard and gloves? Or why a boxing ring must be between 16 and 24 feet? Well, there you go. Those rules helped make boxing a safer and more structured sport. But some of them can be hilarious, especially if you had no idea about them until today. For example, did you know that when a boxer is knocked out of the ring, the referee does a 20-second count? The rule states that a boxer needs to be conscious, and he or she can't be assisted by the spectators or cornermen. If someone helps them up or even touches them, the referee has the right to knock points or even disqualify them. Pretty insane. But then there's the 3 knockdown rule, which I'm sure everyone knows about. First introduced in the 1980s, the rule is pretty simple. If you're knocked down 3 times in a single round or 4 times in an entire fight, the referee will stop the match because you're either not ready to face your opponent or because you're sustaining too much damage. That makes sense, but it's also one of the more controversial rules. The thing is, many critics say that the 3 knockdown rule ends some fights way too quickly. A fighter can get up a 3rd time and still keep going. In fact, there's a history of stoppages that happened way too soon, like Rodriguez versus Barker or Froch versus Groves 1 in 2013. But, on the other hand, there are fans who say that the 3 knockdown rule is necessary. If a fighter's been knocked down 3 times, it's more likely than not that he'll sustain a serious injury if he keeps going. Still, there's no denying that it's a flawed rule and deserves to be tweaked in the future. Now, this next rule is hilarious because something must have happened for the Association of Boxing Commissions and Combative Sports to introduce it. Under the intentional fouls section, it says that if a boxer injures himself while trying to intentionally foul the fighter, then the referee won't take any action in his favor. Plus, that injury will be counted as a fair blow against him. That's an actual rule. Imagine a boxer tries elbowing his opponent, but instead ends up punching himself in the face. It'll be straight out of a sitcom. On to one of the most controversial aspects of boxing, and that's open scoring. It's been used in some pro boxing matches as well as a lot of Olympic boxing matches, and no one likes it, except a few. So, open scoring is essentially announcing the judges' scores after each round, or after a few rounds. This allows both fighters and fans to see how the judges are scoring the bout in real time, and it adds a new level of drama to the match. More recently, fighters like Tyson Fury and Canelo Alvarez have supported the use of open scoring, even though a lot of critics agree that it can lead to fighters playing it safe if they're ahead on scores. Fury and Alvarez's support came after Josh Taylor's controversial win over Jack Catterall. Fans who tuned in to the super lightweight battle said that Catterall was robbed of the title, and Fury suggested that this wouldn't have happened if open scoring was made mandatory. It's an optional rule now, since fighters can choose whether to have their scores announced after a few rounds, but making it mandatory would change boxing in a major way. Fury, on the other hand, says that it would stop fighters from being robbed of their wins since everything is on the up and up and fights can't be fixed. Even Alvarez agreed with him, saying that having the scores announced at every round would help fighters know where they are in the battle. And that's all I have today on the rules you didn't know about boxing.